Get this out of here. Oh yeah. This, much better. 1x versus 2x might be one of the more contentious topics in gravel bikes. People seem to sit on one side of the aisle or the other, and they don't like to budge. I'm definitely that way. I am a hardcore 1x rider. I even ride 1x on my road bike. You're gonna have to pry my narrow-wide chainring from my cold, dead hands. Or pay me. I'm open to sponsorship. Shimano, if you're listening. But the truth is, there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages to each type of drivetrain, and there's a good reason for riders to pick one or the other. Before we get into all that, let's take a look at the drivetrain that I'm gonna be running at Unbound Gravel this year. I've got my 2022 Lauf Segla, which conveniently is a 1x only bike, which means I don't even have the option to run a 2x if I wanted to. I'm running a SRAM AXS mullet drivetrain. I have force axis shifters, a force crankset, an X01 Eagle axis rear derailleur with an Eagle 10 to 50 cassette. I've got a 44 tooth chainring and an XX1 Eagle chain. I've been running a 1x drivetrain on my gravel bike since about 2017. I think it's the best option for off-road racing. I also, come from mountain bikes, so I'm really comfortable riding a 1x. But does that mean you should run a 1x? Maybe, maybe not. I'll say this, Unbound Gravel has been raced and won on both types of drivetrains. Last year, Keegan Swinson, he won on a 1x drivetrain. The year before, Ivar Slick, he won on a 2x. Before that, Ian Boswell, also a 1x. On the women's side, the last 3 years, so Carolyn Schiff, Sofia Gomez Vichafanye, and then Lauren De Crescenzo, former TPC employee, they all raced 2xs. So you can kind of be successful with either. To kind of break down the pros and cons, let's talk specifically about my 1x setup. And let's start with the cons. The 3 big cons are gonna be gear range, jumps between gears, and chain line. So let's start with gear range. The biggest concern a lot of riders have with a 1x setup is overall gear range. Now, a lot of riders, me included, we like having at least a 1-to-1 gear ratio as our climbing gear. Sometimes even easier is better, and that's pretty easy to achieve on a 1x drivetrain with a smaller chainring. But the downside is you get a smaller top gear, which means you have a chance of spinning out. Now, at a race where you're trying to chase fast riders downhill, that could be a problem. But here's what I'll say. With a 40-10, which is what I've run the last 3 times I've gone to Unbound, I've never managed to spin it out. With a 40-10 going at like 110, 120 RPM, you are well over 30 miles per hour, which you almost never achieve at Unbound unless you are a pro rider. I think for most normal people, having a 40 to 44 tooth chainring, somewhere in that range, is more than enough to handle both climbs and descents. I really honestly think gear range with modern 1x drivetrains, especially 12-speed 1x drivetrains, kind of isn't an issue anymore. So, another big problem a lot of riders have with a 1x is the jumps between the gears. If you look at my 10 to 50 tooth cassette here, you can see it's got some pretty big jumps, especially this 42 to 50 tooth here, pretty big. With a 2x drivetrain, you can have a lot more 1-tooth jumps between gears, which keeps them a lot closer together. Riders, they sometimes don't like these big jumps because when you shift, it causes a big change in cadence, sometimes 10, even 15 RPM. If you are like on the rivet, trying to stick to someone, that could be the difference between staying on and getting dropped. But what I'll say is that when you're riding off-road, I really don't notice these jumps in the gears. The terrain, when it's really varied, it causes your cadence to vary really naturally. And these bigger jumps between gears actually suit that sort of terrain really well. Because sometimes with a 2x, I've found you have to shift more than once to get the ideal gear sometimes if you are going on something rolling or if the surface changes. I really just think that these big jumps they work really well when you're riding off-road. Now, if you do want to ride a 1x, but you still care about having those small steps between gears, Campagnolo's Ekar group set is actually a great option. It has a lot more one-tooth jumps at the top end of the cassette. You know, SRAM, the Eagle cassette here, it goes 10 to 12. There are 2 to 3 tooth jumps. And then if you look at the Explore cassette, which is for, you know, racing, it only has a single one-tooth jump from the 10 to the 11-tooth cog. But the Ekar group has a lot more one-tooth jumps, which keeps things a lot closer. Personally, I'm not interested in using it, and I'll get into more a little bit later. But the next thing we're gonna talk about is the chain line. Now, this is an issue sort of common with 1x drivetrains when you're in the extremes of the cassette, so the top gear or the bottom gear. The angle of your chain is a lot more extreme than it is on a 2x. Now, when this happens, there's a lot more friction, which means you lose watts. Companies like Ceramic Speed have compared 1x to 2x drivetrains and tested them and found that 1x drivetrains can lose 1 to 6 watts compared to a 2x drivetrain simply because of these high chain angles. Now, this is probably the one thing that might convince me to use a 2x over a 1x. I will say if you choose the right size chainring, ideally, you should spend most of your time in the middle of the cassette where the chain is the straightest and most efficient. But, you know, definitely a 2x, which can keep the chain straighter at the two extremes of the cassette, is gonna be a little bit more efficient, but even still, I'm not that interested in trying it because of the advantages of using a 1x system. And it's 2 big advantages for me, and that's reliability and simplicity. Now, I might jinx myself by saying this, but I've actually never dropped a chain on a 1x drivetrain. On my gravel bike, on my mountain bike, in a race, I've actually never dropped a chain. I've been really lucky. With a 2x drivetrain, I have dropped many chains. I've also had other issues like breaking the chain with the front derailleur shift, having the chain get all tangled up and clogged with mud in the front derailleur. There are just issues with the front derailleur that sort of bother me reliability wise. This sort of reliability just makes 1x the preferable option for me, especially in a race as rough and long as Unbound, where a lot could go wrong. And also, it is just a lot simpler not having 2 chainrings, not having a front derailleur. It might sound silly, but just not having a front derailleur even exist, there's nothing to think about, and that's like a huge weight off my mind, which is worth something to me. Worry and anxiety like I feel about having a front derailleur, that costs you physical energy. So getting rid of it makes me feel more comfortable and more confident with my bike. And that is really the main reason I stick with 1x. If you're someone who feels that way about a 2x, that's probably a really good reason to stick with the 2x. Like really, honestly, I don't think there is a right or wrong answer when it comes to which type of drivetrain to use. It is whatever drivetrain that you feel the most confident and comfortable using, that's the right choice. Now, this brings me to a final point. I mentioned earlier that I'm probably not gonna try Campy Ekar, and that's because it only comes as a mechanical group set. Now, over the last 2 years, I've become a total convert to electronic group sets. I wanna preface this by saying, yes, they're very expensive. No, they're not gonna make you a faster or better rider. And no, you definitely do not need one, but holy crap, it is so nice to use. It makes shifts super fast, super effortless. When I switched to AXS, it actually made me shift a lot more than I used to, which was a really interesting change. And also, when conditions are really bad, I actually find that my electronic derailleurs are more reliable. They kind of just slam it into gear no matter what crap is on the cassette, which is really cool. They handle water really well. These AXS derailleurs, I've smashed them on rocks and logs, and they keep working. For me, it's worth it. For you, maybe not having a battery could be more confidence inspiring. That's really a personal decision, but I'm a big fan of AXS, and I really I want to tell you the story about what happened to me last year. When I DNF'd, my derailleur did break. Ultimately, the pulley cage shattered. I couldn't fix that. But I was waiting at the cattle pens on course, and there's this Dutch guy there, and he essentially had the same thing happen. His rear derailleur broke, and he was sitting there. And what happened was his crew, they drove to a bike shop, bought him a new AXS derailleur, brought it to him, and he had it installed, paired, and working in less than 10 minutes, and he just rode off. And later, when I was waiting for my wife at the finish, I saw this dude finish, and I felt so jealous. And so, if it happens again this year, hopefully it doesn't, where I destroy a rear derailleur, I'm gonna have my support crew do that same exact thing for me. Technically, it's against the rules, but at that point, I don't care. I don't want to finish. I'm not a pro. It'll be worth it for me just to have that option. So that's why I am running a 1x AXS drivetrain. All you 2x mechanical drivetrain lovers, you can roast me in the comments. I'd love to hear why I'm wrong. If you are going to be upgrading or building up a gravel bike this year, we have all these SRAM and Shimano drivetrain components available at theproscloset.com. We also have plenty of 1x and 2x gravel bikes to choose from. We have a discount code which will get you $50 off your first order of $200 or more. So be sure to check us out if you want. If you are eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that this chain has a wax coating on it. And that's what we will be talking about next time. I'll see you then. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.